And we are back Monday morning. Roy Rickstrew, the disability guru. We're going to talk in a few minutes about how do you know? How do you know when it's time to quit work and tap in and say, I can't do this anymore? We'll be back. We'll talk about that right after this.
I want to be your disability rep.
You know, I suspect that's kind of a tough decision to make, and there's a lot of things that go into that. First of all, probably there's a little bit of pride that we have to overcome personally to say, I can't be in the workforce anymore.
Yeah, you know, and especially in this part of the country, a lot of people are just raised to where you work until you die, basically, and it's that mindset. It's kind of hard to. Yeah,
good. You should.
Yeah, it's a great thing. You know, my dad had double knee replacement. He talked the doctor into doing both of them at the same time so that he would miss less work.
Yeah.
And he was a welder by trade. He didn't go back to work, but he was optimistic enough he thought he would.
Yeah.
And I encounter people all the time that have that same mindset that, you know, we work until they bury us, and that's just the way that it is.
Sure.
But, you know, there are some indications. Obviously, your employer will help you out with that sometimes. You know, you'll struggle at work. You have to start enlisting help of your coworkers. Things that are kind of obvious to folks. You're missing hours, having to go to the doctor a lot, can't do substantial portions of your job. Those are all pretty good indicators that it's maybe time. If you're spending all of your time off, having to recuperate from the work that's almost killing you, that's usually an indication too. Unfortunately, a lot of people, it comes down to finances and how do you navigate that switch
that is tricky.
from one to the other. Obviously, when you go onto the disability program, you're going to make less money than when you worked. So you've kind of got to prepare for that. And then the Social Security Administration won't pay you for the first 5 months that you're disabled under the Social Security Disability Program. So there's a real problem in trying to make that transition.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
What, if anything, is there to help people bridge that gap?
Yeah, there's not a lot.
Do?
There's not a lot. If you're really low income or you don't have a lot of resources, you can file for the SSI program. It's payable the month after application. Sometimes it'll fill that 5-month gap for folks, but you still got to go through the process. You got to go through the delay. You got to wait for them to make a decision. So it's tough. It really is. Ideally, we'd like to be able to prepare ahead for that. But unfortunately, you know, disability drops out of the sky and just lands on some of us where we don't get much of a forewarning.
Yeah, sometimes not at all. It just happens, you know.
A couple other things, you know, $1,570 a month gross is what they consider to be full-time competitive employment, substantial gainful activity, they call it. And so I have a lot of clients that work some, don't make $1,570 a month. The important thing for people to remember is that there are 4.333 weeks in a month. And so when you do calculations for how many hours you can work or how much money you can make per week, you've got to figure in that third of a month. So I tell folks a lot of times, you know, if you can transition to part-time work, make $1,200 a month, you can file for disability and help bridge that gap.
Yeah. And then even when you're on disability, can you keep that part-time work?
Yeah, you can. In fact, Social Security's got several different programs that kind of help people to continue in the workforce or to reintegrate into the workforce. It's actually pretty pro-client in that regard.
Well, that's really good. That's really glad to hear because, you know, I would assume there's a lot of scenarios where that part-time work includes some training. You get some training, you get some experience, and then all of a sudden, hey, I could do this job full-time, make more than I'm on disability, and I could get off the program.
Yeah, sure. In vocational rehabilitation, I'm sure you're aware of it. But, you know, Voc Rehab out there helps line up employers who are willing to give accommodations with folks whose health demands those accommodations. And a lot of times that accommodated work through Voc Rehab turns into an opportunity. And those folks, you develop a relationship with that employer, and then they're able to make those accommodations long-term and bring you on full-time even.
Yeah, great programs, fun to explore. And, of course, you can help people with all of that if they have questions about that.
I have one other thing I'm going to cover real quick, if I can.
Yeah.
There's another thing with Social Security called subsidized earnings. And I wanted to mention this because sometimes this relates to people. Subsidized earnings are where you are going to work and you're being paid as if you're full-time, but you're not actually doing all of the work that's associated with that. And so I'll tell a quick story.
Sure.
Had a client in Joplin years ago, worked at one of the hospitals, had a condition in which she developed tumors on her lungs, and the tumors would rupture, and when they ruptured, her lung would deflate.
Ugh.
And the hospital, bless their hearts, rented her the house that was closest to the emergency room,
Yep.
put her up in it, put a couch in her work area so she could lay down when she needed to. The staff there donated their leave time to her so she could take off whenever she needed to take off. When the dust settled, she did about 40% of her actual job duties.
Yeah.
And because of that, Social Security counted 40% of her earnings when they were calculating whether or not she was at substantial and gainful activity. And so she was able to make considerably more than our $1,570 because of the subsidized nature. Now, something people run into a lot of times with big employers is the Human Resources Department doesn't want to commit to you being a less than full-time, less than actual employee.
Right.
And you can probably already, as a lawyer, you're running through all the scenarios.
Yeah, not for a full-time salary, for sure.
Well, right, but if somebody gets hurt and you find out that they had limitations, then all of a sudden you open the door for a lawsuit.
There's a negligence issue there. Sure.
But sometimes small employers, family-run businesses are willing to make that, are willing to stipulate to the fact that the earnings are somewhat subsidized. And so, if you are out there trying to figure out if it's time to leave the workforce, maybe your employer's able to say, I eliminate the heavy lifting from this job so that they can continue, or maybe you can reduce your hours and bridge some of that gap.
A lot of information today, Roy. It's going to be hard for me to keep track of it all. If you can't keep track of it all, you call Roy. His number's on the screen, 417-812-6698. He'll talk to you today.
Yeah.
He's got time. He'll answer his phone, and we'll be back next week. Thank you.
I want to be your disability rep.